Hi, everyone. Thank you, everyone. We shall get started. We have lunch at 1:30, and I know there are some people who have flights to take this afternoon, so it's good to just get going. So if we can take our seats, check our phones are on silent, and we'll get going with the final session. And this morning's talks were so utterly inspiring and reaffirming of humanity. And I felt a real sense, without being too soppy about it, but maybe we need to talk about it a bit more, which is a real sense of love that people have for land, for nature, for each other, and how healing nature can be to bring people together. But anyway, now we need to talk about money and financing. So plummet back to earth. And I suppose the big question is how to get it. Pitfalls and all the rest, how to get it. There are a lot of money out there to be got, a lot of willingness by corporates to put money into restoration, which is great. But there's a lot of learning, and I suppose it needs to happen urgently at scale and all the things we know. So we've got some really great speakers. We're also going to have a chance for a good discussion. I'd encourage you all just to put your hands up and we can take questions. It's the easiest way, but we have Slido too, so please use Slido to ask any question you want as well. So our first speaker is Peter Williams. He's the Group Technology Director of INEOS. And since 2018, he's established and overseen research and conservation work in Iceland for the 6 Rivers Iceland project, which forms links with the wider Atlantic salmon community as well. So we're going to hopefully hear a bit about that. He also sits on the UK's Building a Green Future Advisory Board and is chairperson of the Industrial Biotechnology Innovation Centre in Scotland. Peter.
Thank you very much, and thank you all, and also thanks to Mark and Wendy for giving us a slot. I'm not sure what I've got in this slide pack corresponds to the title of the session that was just given, but it alludes to it and shows you some examples of it, and no doubt in the discussion afterwards we can get to that. So 6 Rivers, what is it? And first of all, I think a bit of context from my perspective, because we get engaged in a number of conservation activities within INEOS, not just in Iceland, but elsewhere, for example, a large one in Africa. And the driving force behind all that is really captured, I think, on this slide, as is the plight of the salmon. As human population has grown, animal life, wildlife has diminished. And the Atlantic salmon reduction that we all talk about, we heard 70% this morning, I think that pretty much corresponds to what's on this chart, fortunately, actually matches what's happening more generally. And that sort of data comes from here. So on the left-hand side of this chart, we have the Living Planet Report 2024, which shows over this period of time the general reduction, the 70% reduction in wildlife as measured by, in a number of ways, but volume and diversity are 2 of the principal entrants there. And as we know on the right-hand side of the chart, then Atlantic salmon has been moving to the right on the IUCN Red List. It's now classified as not quite endangered globally, but as we know in the UK, it is. And as we know in Norway, several rivers were closed for fishing in the last 12 months because of the decline of returning salmon. So a big issue, and one that we wanted to make a contribution on, if we can. And what I would like to talk about now is some of the actions we're doing, and there might be a bit of technical stuff in there somewhere, but also then make a few comments on advocacy. So 6 Rivers project, what is it? Well, from my point of view, it's a long-term project. It's not quickly in, quickly out. It's holistic. We're looking at all the factors around the river systems, including community. And we want to make it sustainable. Northeast Iceland, and as many areas in Iceland, is regarded as an exceptionally good sports angling area for wild Atlantic salmon. And what we want to do is make this sustainable by using all the proceeds of that angling on the rivers that we have a say in, and funding, using those proceeds, the conservation work in this holistic program. We're working with others, obviously. Probably most important, actually, is the river associations in the area. That's the community. All our people there, of course, live in the community and come from the community, but we're working with the river associations. But a great homage to Gudny Gudbergson, who you've heard from already in this conference, because a lot of the work on these rivers up to the last few years has been led solely by the MFRI, with whom we're collaborating. We've also collaborated with Imperial College over a period of time as well. And so what I'll present is some of the stuff coming out of that. And I think some of the implications that I've learned as a non-salmon person in 2018. In 2018, I was like one of those people who thought salmon existed somewhere. I knew there were wild salmon, but my main contact with salmon was in the supermarket, frankly. Now I think I know, I'm not an expert, I don't claim to be, I know enough to be dangerous, both to myself and to others, and usually to myself, actually, but I know enough now to be dangerous. So what are our themes there? Well, first of all, we want that income, so we're spending a lot on infrastructure, improving the infrastructure to make sure that world-class fishing persists and people come and give us the money, a little like we heard earlier today, anglers paying for the conservation. The second thing is management of fishing pressure. Often said, quite often the narrative, overfishing, etc., we think that's important, so we're managing fishing pressure. I'll come to that in a second. And then the conservation and research leading both to shorter-term management interventions and things for the longer term that will take time, in our view, to rectify. And whilst we're doing that, monitoring very, very carefully what goes on. So those are our main themes. And where are the rivers? Probably best to tell you something about that first of all, in case you don't know Iceland. This is a picture of Iceland, obviously, and on the top right is a picture of where our rivers are, with the rivers indicated in them, and the key rivers we're working on in the box, and that includes what I think is a pretty famous Sellau River, and I'll talk more about some of the work on the Sellau River in particular during this talk. So what's been happening, I thought it was useful to specify what's happening compared to all the charts we see on Scotland, Norway, etc., and in the rest of Iceland. I think probably Gudny showed you some of that. What's happened to rod catches in this area? Went through a peak around the 2010 mark, in that early 2000s, through a peak, and have come down again. They've come down to roughly the same level, and I'll come back to that shortly. So if you look at this chart compared to 30 or 40 years ago, the title's wrong, it actually goes back to 74, this, not 85, then it looks like we're about the same as we've always been, apart from that one peak. And by the way, that one peak was experienced, as far as I can see, everywhere in the North Atlantic Basin. So that peak occurred everywhere, which is itself, I think, an interesting point. And what are we doing in terms of our actions? Well, there are really 2 or 3 pathways to take. One is increase the river productivity. I mean, we took the view at the outset that we've got pristine river systems in northeast Iceland. We're privileged to have pristine river systems. They're not dammed. There's no agricultural runoff. There's no industry around it. It's a very simple system. There are only 3, maybe 4 fish. There are salmon, there are trout, there are Arctic char, and some sticklebacks, I believe, although I've never seen one. And therefore, it's a very, very simple system. And I think that's what makes it powerful, actually, as a system for research and conservation, because we're able not to confound some of the issues of what's happening with agricultural runoff, what's happening with industrial activity close by, with the work we're doing on the rivers. So I think that's why this is a valuable thing to share more widely as well. So what are we doing on the river? Catch and release, very important. Show you some information on that shortly. Managing fishing pressure, as I said. Food and trees, as Rasmus, who's our chief scientist, who's in the audience here, tells me it's a bit of a link, that Pete, between food and trees, but you'll see what we mean by that in a second. And also predation. And I'm not going to talk about that, but Iceland, the mink was introduced to Iceland some time ago. Naturally, it escaped, and it's now become quite an efficient predator, not just of fish, but also of birds and so on. So we want to do something about that, and we're controlling that. So that's about the river, making sure we do the best for the fish in the river, the par, and as they become smolts, and so on. And we're also increasing production area. We're looking carefully at where to develop ladders. We're looking carefully at unused parts of the rivers at the moment where we think suitable salmon habitat exists, but is not being used today. And that actually sometimes is very accessible already to the salmon, which is an interesting point. And we're looking, because of that, to relocate fish. And obviously monitoring as we go, very important. Make sure you know what you've done and the effect it's had before you do something more important. So I'm only going to focus on the three. There are a few things there. There are things in bold. So let's get into that. Catch and release. What's happened on the Salmon River with regard to catch and release? And this is going back to Goodney's and his team's data in the Marine and Freshwater Research Institute. On the left-hand side, what you see there in the red line is the Salmon catch and release level going up to 100% over several rivers. Today, we have 100% catch and release, unless a fish is badly injured, for example. But it's 100% catch and release. And the grey bars show what's happened to the juvenile levels during that period. And juvenile levels, as you'd hope, have gone up. And I think the health of the juveniles, looking now at Goodney for a nod or a nay, are okay as well, actually, during that period. And it was a nod, so that's good. And then on the right-hand side, we see what's happened to the catch. And at first, until about 2010, 2008, we're probably all clapping our hands. I wasn't there at the time, but I'm sure it was a useful impact. Numbers were going up as catch and release increased. But of course, since 2010, those numbers have reduced. So something else is going on, and that piques our attention. That gets our attention. So that's the sort of work we're doing. We're doing that on other rivers increasingly and so on, working with the MFRI and Colina, who's one of the members of Goodney's team. So catch and release, am I going the right way here? Food, I mentioned food. Food is in short supply. I guess we always knew that, but this time with the PhD that we put together with the MFRI, a good PhD student, we assessed that. So we took 4 of the rivers, the ones you see here on the chart. We looked at 4 points on each of those rivers, and we looked at what was in the river with regard to food, and we looked at what was in the stomachs with regard to eating. And the bottom line is, food is in relatively short supply in these rivers, which is what you'd expect, I guess, intuitively. It's a fairly tree-free at the moment landscape. It's a fairly simple landscape. There used to be birch forest there. That was taken down in 14th century or 13th century as humans came in. Remember that chart of humans versus nature? As humans came in, that was taken down. And so it's a very simple habitat in the area, relatively speaking. So what are we doing about that? Well, the long-term project for us is planting trees, because as you plant trees, as you know, I'm sure you know, you increase biodiversity, you introduce food into the rivers. It might be done for shade in other rivers in different regions. We're not doing it for shade here, frankly. We've got enough low-temperature water running through our rivers, but we are doing it to increase biodiversity and increase biomass flow into the rivers to provide eventually the food for the young salmon. And that is a big program, even by Icelandic standards. It's part, you can see it almost now, as part of the Iceland government strategy for reforestation. So we've worked closely with them to look at how to do this. And what the chart on the right shows what we've been doing on the Salmon River. The green area overall is where we're going to plant around the catchment. The dark green areas where we've already planted. And by 2028, our ambition is to be planting 1 million trees per year. There's quite a lot involved in doing that, in getting the saplings and all that sort of stuff. You've got to plan quite far ahead to do that sort of stuff. But we're targeting that, and for us, that's one of the long-term actions that we're taking. So what about shorter-term actions? Relocation of spawning adults. This was a surprise to me, actually, because the team has taken the view that in our rivers, there are certain areas that salmon should support a thriving salmon population that currently do not. So what we've been doing is catching adults, ready for spawning, not quite ready for spawning, obviously, and then radio tagging them, relocating them into those areas, and then monitoring what happened. Now, we've taken the controlled part of the population. We don't want to take too many for this sort of intervention. So we've taken about 10%, not more, of fish, probably 5 to 10% of adult fish that return to the river. And we find that when we move them up to the upper reaches of the Salmon River, for example, and into Harrington River, which is a tributary high up, and we place them in position, they stay there. Actually, they seem to quite like it. We do that obviously by monitoring through the winter, initially in the first 30 days, and then through the winter. Do they stay there? Have they spawned? Do they stay there? When did they go back to sea? And so on. And we find they stay there. And they spawn there. And since then, we've found that there are developing juvenile populations in those areas. So by doing that, we're hoping that we've opened up new areas of the river in which we'll have thriving juvenile populations of salmon, and therefore, hopefully, a more thriving adult population in due course. So we've got more to do on that. The two charts, by the way, top is where they are 5 days after release, then 20 days after release. And if you look at the results overall, then they all are within a couple of kilometers of where we release them. It's up to 480 meters high, which in Iceland is high. I mean, it's pretty high in Iceland. You don't, midwinter, you don't want to be there that long, to be quite honest. And I think, have I got this wrong, Rasmus? This 30%, that looks slightly high, but I don't know if Rasmus is in the room anyway, but 30% find the way to the sea. It's the right number, yes. I know we've got a limited set of data, but it's roughly there at the moment. 30% return to the river, survive and return to the river. So far so good. We'll monitor what happens, and hopefully we'll see population improvements. So all these interventions and the previous ones from Goodney and team on the rivers, what's happening in Iceland? I thought this was useful. I mean, the assumptions in this chart, comparison chart, are probably quite as wild as the salmon themselves, to be quite honest, in some cases. But on the left, we see the Scottish Government data on Scottish rod catch. From 74 to 2022, we see the peak in that 2000s, early 2000s period, which I referred to, and we see it coming back down. Now, that's rod catch, and we don't know if the rod catch efficiency was the same, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're the wild assumptions that go into this. But I thought it was interesting to compare what's happened in northeast Iceland on the Sellau in that same period. And so it does lead to the thought that, well, maybe actually they are doing okay in northeast Iceland, relatively speaking, in terms of a returning population. I mean, we're not going to make that a thesis or anything like that. As I say, some of the assumptions behind this are as wild as the salmon themselves, probably. But it does maybe show that without the sort of work that's gone on for the last decade or more, and more recently, then maybe we would have been in a worse position. I don't know, but we'll find out as we go forwards. Remember, I said this is a long-term program. That's the bit on technical stuff, and happy to answer questions on that afterwards. That's the sort of actions we're taking. We're a very simplistic, pragmatic organization. We want to do stuff, basically. So we hopefully try and get the best advice we can, do our best work we can. But as you see, our aim is to get in there and actually do stuff. It's flashing 000 here. Does that mean I have to stand down now? I can still go on, can I? Just a couple more minutes. Okay. Advocacy. We've talked a lot about this in this conference, I think, what I would head in as advocacy. So I wanted to share a few thoughts that we can follow up afterwards on the panel. And the backdrop to this, for me, is that salmon aren't the only species at risk. Everything's at risk in the wildlife, almost. We've heard of some positive examples, but, compared to the last dying desert white rhino, or etc., that, it doesn't quite capture the imagination as much as we'd like when you have this common problem among a wide range of species. And by the way, we do know that conservation works because that red list, sometimes species go up on that red list, not just down. And so conservation work, that's a point I should have made earlier. So what does that say in terms of advocacy? And as I've come into this area, there's a huge amount of great stuff going on. We've heard a lot of it in the conference and this morning, for example. It seems to me, coming from a completely different industry, completely different background, messages land best when it is one voice, regardless of the organization. In my own field of the chemical industry, one company just waving a flag doesn't do much, to be quite honest. It might be correct, it might be accurate, but unless our collective thoughts unless they have an impact on the passing world, nothing will happen. And that passing world includes politicians, regulators, and somehow we have to imagine ourselves on the outside of our discussions on salmon. And what am I hearing when I hear all this? Is it clear? Are the messages simple? But also, do they capture the actual issues at stake? Dams in some areas, as we've heard, other things in other areas, agricultural runoff, etc. And that is a very difficult task, and I think behoves us to have a go at that task, one voice. And then the next thing is the clear messages. I mean, as I said, there'll be several, but one voice, clear messages. Enrollment of broader stakeholders. The film this morning was a brilliant example of that, actually. Wouldn't it be nice to have a film like that on the Atlantic salmon, for example, that was the right length to sustain interest, to influence the broader public? Because at the end of the day, as we've heard, politicians have to win votes in our Western world, at least in the world around the Atlantic basin, they have to win votes. And that requires influence if we're to alter regulations. Enrollment in that broader stakeholder, really important. And you know, a key thing for me is making sure we're not captured in bigger issues. Climate change is real, we're seeing it, we worry about it. In my business, we're working hard on it. And I think most businesses of any sense are working hard on it. But if I talk to a politician about climate change, there's a long, long list of things to worry about with regard to climate change. You know, so let's be careful we don't get caught up in a long, long list with different priorities where we get a nice nod and then later on, actually it didn't quite make the action list. I think someone mentioned the Labour manifesto. It's not quite made the action list on some items, and it's understandable why not. And then cooperate on essential data. And there's essential data, and there's really good and interesting data. I think we know how to do a lot of stuff with Atlantic salmon. We know how to improve rivers, we know how to breed populations, we know how to breed wild populations, we understand the impact on genetic structure and so on of various activities, but the essential data is the data that helps make our point in a very simple and clear way. And I think, I mean, certainly we're prepared to work with the community on this, but I think this is an extremely important thing for the community to do. And with that, I'm going to be quiet. Thank you very much for your attention, and speak later.
Thank you, Peter. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. That was really interesting, especially the last bit, and some really great advice there. So we're going to go to Allison Colina from the Pacific Salmon Foundation now. I gather she's an absolutely astonishingly successful fundraiser. She grew up on Vancouver Island with her father off the coast of Nitnat, and she's the Vice President of Development, Marketing and Communications at the foundation. She previously worked in the healthcare sector as a member of a senior leadership at one of the largest cancer foundations, and worked with medical and scientific leadership and major donors, managing media announcements for scientific and medical advancements. So, Allison. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for having me today. I'm very happy to be here and share a little bit about our journey at the Pacific Salmon Foundation into growing our supporter base and our fundraising revenue over the last few years. I really hope you'll hear some consistent themes around storytelling, generational impact, and urgency that we've been hearing over the last few days here. Before I dive in, I wanted to ask you all to reflect on two quick questions. First, can you recall the last charitable donation you made? Now, can you recall why you made that donation? What motivated you? It's this second question, the why, that I believe is really fundamental. What motivates that individual to give, and where do we as organizations fit in? PSF is fortunate to have a long-standing cohort of donors, but the number is quite small, a few giving really the lion's share. Our CEO, who you heard from earlier today, recognized a few years ago that we were a little too dependent and a little vulnerable with that small cohort of donors. So my job over the last few years has been looking at our brand, how I can grow that, and how we can really grow that donor base. Just a contextual piece. This is within an environment where individual donations in Canada have been decreasing for 11 consecutive years. And within that space, environmental charities receive a very small percentage, despite 32% of Canadians saying that climate change or protecting the environment is a top cause. And when I was considering the roles, you heard I came from the cancer environment, which really touches us all. I had to think to myself, wow, just salmon? Like how am I gonna do this? Do people really care that much about these fish to give? Well, it turns out through some of the brand research we did, we know that our existing donors care very deeply about salmon, as all of you in the room do. And then what you heard from Mike, which was a nice little sigh of relief aha moment for me, is that our general public in British Columbia cares very deeply about salmon as well. The majority of British Columbians actually, as Mike said, rank this as their top environmental concern. But how do we bridge that gap? We have a few hundred active donors, a huge amount of support in the public, and where do we go from there to get those people engaged in giving? For salmon, I really believe that we need to tap into those relationships that we all have with nature. We've heard a lot about this over the last few days. Whether it's experiences out fishing, watching and marveling at the return, like the video clips we saw earlier today, connecting with that generational cultural impact. That's actually my son over there on the right, bobbing around in the Salish Sea in a fishing boat. That's very much how I grew up. That's how my parents grew up, and it really runs deep. And we can pass that on and that generational connection to nature through the stories that we share. In this room, we've heard inspiring, at times sobering stories about salmon, their habitats, and what we as people are doing to address that. So we know we have the stories to really nurture this connection and deepen that relationship with donors. I want to really just emphasize that deep connection people have with salmon from our context with a very quick little video clip here.
Stuck in the Indian River was very devastating. I know it's a lot of things that lead up to that and contribute to that. Salmon is a staple of Tsleil-Waututh people.
So that video clip is a very tiny piece of a broader story that you've heard about from Jason and Mike, where PSF stepped in to take action when thousands of salmon were trapped. But I really wanted to emphasize the human connection, that deep, deep piece of wanting to do something about the problem that we're facing. And I think that piece is really key to bridging that gap I talked about with the broad public support and giving. So as we embarked on this growth trajectory, we first looked at our brand. What can we do to make sure that we're out there and resonating with people? And something stood out in that research. Environmental charities have kind of this long history of using pretty doom and gloom messaging in their advertising and in their campaigns. And we heard this morning too that this isn't really a path to motivate people. It's pretty depressing, and it doesn't really drive people to action. And so we made a very conscious brand decision to focus as much as we could on optimism. So our focus is really on harnessing that passion and power of people for salmon. And we do that through sharing stories of progress. Those habitat projects that you heard Jason talk about, big or small, did it help a fish? Did it help thousands? Stories like that resonate. People are drawn to progress. They're drawn to seeing positive impact. Like Jim implored us to do last night at the dinner, we've been increasingly telling those stories to our donors and a broader base through media. This keeps salmon top of mind. It deepens people's understanding of their plight, and it really helps warm that new audience to an ask. This is another quick example of some of the stories that we've been sharing.
When I saw the first salmon swimming past my feet, I had goosebumps. It would be heartbreaking to see a situation like this where there was a problem for salmon and we knew we could do something about it and we couldn't take action because we were short the money to take action.
So that clip to me is about two things. It's about the salmon and solutions that were in place, but to me it's equally about Jason's passion for what we were trying to do as an organization for salmon. And I think it's that passion that really resonates with our donor base and the broader public. So you've heard all these stories that we're sharing, relatable, highlighting impact, but how does that translate to new donors? So just like salmon, we know that we need diversity in our fundraising to withstand changing conditions. We needed to grow our donor base, and we wanted to start with smaller dollar donors because, as I said, we had this kind of little top of the pyramid, but nothing underneath it supporting that base. So again, we did a lot of work on our brand. This is our favorite staff member, Mr. Brown. He features in our advertising campaign. So we do try to have a little fun and connect with people kind of in a warm, heart-centered way. But one of the first things we started doing was a door-to-door solicitation campaign, and it worked. We've grown our monthly donor base from 20 up to 700 people, and that compounds year over year. They're small dollars, $20 a month, but those people are now just as passionate about salmon as all of us in this room. We also have been putting a lot of focus in digital. This is where people spend their time, and so we want to get there in front of people. We've been offering these little incentivized campaigns, working with a lot of our corporate partners. Fun one down here, this company is actually called Prince of Wales, which I thought was really fun for this audience. So whale watchers, beer companies, these companies really help us reach a whole new audience, and it's a win-win-win. So they get the profile of being supportive of a cause that people care about. We're able to grow our awareness, and they raise money for us. Through these campaigns, we've actually been able to welcome a few thousand new donors. Part of our strategy has also been leaning into growing the base and really connecting with people around the climate emergencies that Jason spoke about yesterday. And I really feel these are opportunities for us to lean in to what's happening in our climate every day, but we really do try to add a little dash of optimism through the action that we're taking. This story here actually relates to the flood that Jason talked about yesterday. It was way further up. Thousands of coho were stranded, and the team was mobilized to create a little passage so thousands of coho could get through that logjam. That story went on to get incredible media coverage and was ranked as one of the top environmental stories of the year. And those are really important moments for us to deepen that connection between what's happening in the climate and these big emergencies that we're seeing on our land base and what we can do about it. And from day one, when we started to do this work and really lean into the climate action piece, our donors were right there with us. It started out with $1 million donation. And as we've been sharing these stories of action from the field, we've seen donors come to us and actually ask, like, how can I help? Can I give more? And that's because it really hits on that piece of people wanting to make a difference. They want to be a part of a solution, and we're really trying to help deliver that to them. This is one last quick example.
It was really heartening to see with the work that was completed today that the fish are immediately responding to the increased cover. So we were instantly seeing small juvenile fish using these logs as cover to escape the sun and find shade and lower temperature areas of the stream to live in.
Seeing this work done is awesome work. I can't wait to see the outcome of this. Salmon is one of our main resources. Protect the land, land will protect you.
So bridging these impactful stories and meaningful relationships kind of leads me to the last piece of our fundraising journey. I've talked a little bit about some of the tactics we've been doing to grow that smaller dollar donor base, but we know that salmon and their habitats need a lot more. We've welcomed a few thousand new donors. We've grown our revenue more than 110% over the last few years, but we've set our sights higher. Mike talked about that strategic plan earlier today, and that requires a lot more funding. So we're embarking on a $40 million campaign over the next few years, and that's going to require us to triple our revenue. And I do believe that these stories are key to that success, because that deepening of that connection to nature and what we can do for salmon is really going to motivate people to come along that journey with us, to think bigger with us about what we can do. And $40 million may not sound like a lot. Is it enough to do everything we need to do for salmon on the Pacific coast? Absolutely not. But is it an important first step? We think so. And we think if we can show progress and show that we're scaling our work with their support, that they'll be able to come along that journey as we scale up as well. I'm going to leave you with one last thought. While the work that we do is for the fish, I believe it's just as much about the people. Our growth journey is really centered on bringing stories from the field, as I shared, that showcase progress in action. And that's really deepen that connection between people, salmon, and the organization, the people doing the work in the field. So thank you so much for your time.
We're going to have a discussion. Thank you. Thank you so much, Allison. We're going to have a bit of a discussion and get your questions in through Slido if you want to ask some questions. We are going to also add, along with Allison and Peter, who I'd ask if you could come up and sit down here, please. Alex Adam from the Rivers Trust is with us, as is Charlotte Harrington, who is the CEO of BELU Water. Charlotte. There she is. Thank you. You have? Yeah. Oh, do you have them together? Yeah. Ah, sorry. I'm so sorry. I've made a mistake. They have presentations. So it's not. We're not going to go straight into a talk. We're going to have presentations first, which is even better. So Alex is going to talk first. Sorry, Alex. I didn't know.
No worries. Sorry for getting in the way of your lunch. I'm Alex from the Rivers Trust. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for everyone for putting this together. I feel very much like I'm standing on the shoulder of giants here today. It's been a very impressive 3 days, so thanks to Wendy, Mark and the whole team. I've been asked to do a bit of a presentation about some of the work we've been doing in the Rivers Trust about securing funding for watershed restoration or catchment restoration. And my presentation today, I'm going to cover a number of different concepts. First one being that I've changed the title from nature finance to watershed restoration because actually I think it's just finance. I think we need to be a bit careful about being overly prescriptive and overly narrow about putting that money into nature restoration. This is about climate resilience. How do we, address the issues that we're all facing in terms of habitat degradation, climate adaptation, etc., etc. It's about how do we take the money to apply for the right things in the right places. I'd also like to thank Mark, my CEO of the Rivers Trust, for piloting and trialling some of my slides for his opening session on Monday. I think some of you might have seen this before. I start nearly every one of my presentations with this because I think it illustrates a number of really, really important points. First one is water is the kind of the lifeblood of our country, of all our countries. It's kind of fundamental to businesses, to communities, to recreation, to habitat. It's the one thing that brings us all together. It also illustrates the importance of catchment restoration, systems change. How do we actually start to manage our environment at a manageable level in a way that we can all start to understand? And it also, to my mind, illustrates the point around water is the currency of natural capital. What do I mean by that? There's a huge amount of work that's going on already around offsets, carbon, peatland, etc., which is all great, but how do we bring all that stuff together in a meaningful way that we can deliver significant change at scale at a catchment level? And at the moment, I think that the way we are going, it's lots of individual silos, all being very well-meaning, very kind of useful, but we need to think of a way of bringing that together so we can have the scale of impact that we need. One of the first concepts I'm going to talk about is water stewardship. I always do this. Has anyone got an idea what water stewardship is? Please put your hand up. Okay, fantastic. 2. I'm fortunate enough to spend quite a lot of time talking to businesses or in different communities where we all talk about water. Very much they're talking about very similar things to you, but they're using slightly different language in a slightly different place. And there's a really important point about how do we bring these different, albeit disparate communities together to start to lean in collectively on some of these problems. Water stewardship is a theory of change that's been developed by WWF. It's been around for the best part of 18, 20 years, and it's evolved over that time. And this is my kind of creative illustration of the water stewardship ladder. And I'd be, just take a moment to pause to think about where you sit, either as an organisation, a business, or an individual, in terms of that kind of water stewardship ladder. First of all, actually thinking about water, the amount of businesses and organisations who don't even really think about water, where it comes from, where it's going to. What are the impacts and risks on your business? What happens if your hole runs dry, or you've got flooding, or you've got water shortages? How do you start to, what's that impact going to be on your business? The internal action, what can you do inside your own factory gates? And there's a lot of businesses that we're working with who are working through what can be done, water efficiency, rainwater harvesting, all those good things within their kind of their own factory gate. And then we get into the area that's of particular interest to myself and the Rivers Trust and the catchment-based approach, and resonates very clearly with this audience, which is around collective action. So no matter how big an organisation you are, or a business, you are in a catchment, you are in a collective space with others. So if you want to reduce the potential risk to your business from water quality, too much, too little, too dirty, you've got to start thinking at a catchment scale. You've got to start thinking collaboratively. And then final step is the influence. Peter's point about a shared voice. How do businesses, communities all work together with a shared voice, leaning collectively on some of these issues to ultimately make our politicians do the things that we need them to do? So that's the theory. Water stewardship as defined, use of water that is socially, culturally equitable, environmentally sustainable, economically beneficial, achieved through a stakeholder inclusive process that includes both site and catchment-based solutions. How do we use that? How do we align that to meet the needs of the salmon? Cold, clean water. How do we actually start getting that shared language, collaboration, to actually start making the change we need at a catchment scale? That's what I try and do. Another thing that I think is worth sharing, and there's been some really good presentations today and discussions around collective action and the need of collective action and the theory of change and some of the mechanics around that. This is a publication that was produced last year by WWF, TNC, CO Water Mandate, Rivers Trust. There's about 30 different NGOs, 40 different businesses who have been involved in developing this paper. It's deliberately unbranded. We didn't want the logos and the egos getting in the way, which is a seminal piece of work. And I think that's a really big problem in this sector. How do we get genuine collaboration across the piece, amongst the NGO audience, farming audiences, businesses? I would really recommend everyone spends a bit of time reading on this. This systems change point that was made earlier, there's a lot of work. This has been going on in years, southern hemisphere work. It's a really, really seminal piece of work that kind of doesn't get it all right, but it provides potentially a blueprint for all of us to say, how do we start to get this collective action, this catchment scale restoration? Another concept, show of hands, who's heard of volumetric water benefit accounting before? Well done, Mark. Well done, mate. There we go, Paul. I really like this. This is something that has driven some really, really good outcomes on the ground. It has been developed by businesses over probably about the last 10 to 12 years. It's science-based. It basically allows for businesses to account for their water use and any mitigating actions they are doing at a catchment scale to offset, for want of a better term, the really water that they are using. Now, it's not perfect. The science is evolving, but it's very robust. And interestingly, there are some very, very big organisations and very big companies taking this stuff very seriously and making real investments using volumetric water benefit accounting. What I'm trying to do, what we're trying to do with the Rivers Trust, is apply this methodology to work in our catchments to build out that scale of change, to develop those nature-based solutions, move away from concrete. We've got to move away from concrete. We've got to mainstream our nature-based solutions. This is a really robust methodology developed by businesses adopted by a growing number of businesses. It also delivers some really good stuff on the ground. This is just a snapshot. I was very conscious of time of some of the work that we've been doing with a range of different businesses, really over the last 5 years, about different projects we're doing within catchments with different businesses. So we've got Coca-Cola, we've got Britvic, we've got Amazon Web Services. Claire from Amazon Web Services, they use a lot of water in their data centres, sends her apologies, she had to be in Italy today. Bentley, Sainsbury's, Mark mentioned the Wire project that we've been involved with over the last 4 or 5 years about how do we start to do collective action at catchment scale, bringing together the landowners, different buyers to deliver that flood risk mitigation. The Wire, we did it for 10 farmers. We've learnt a lot. Sainsbury's invested in it as a pilot as part of their kind of water neutrality targets. So this is nascent. It's not perfect, but actually it's quite encouraging the overall direction of travel. And to my mind, this is going to be, or should be, a very important part of that fundraising or leveraging finance to catchment restoration. It won't be all of it, and I think we need to set our expectations, particularly in the UK, about the level of private versus public finance that's available. But this is a very important, measurable mechanism. So I'm actually going to mention something about salmon in a moment, unbelievably. So what we've been doing, Teresa mentioned about farm cluster groups. The Minister mentioned the other day about landscape recovery projects. One of the projects that we are doing at the moment up in Cumbria is the Resilient Glendamachin project, where we are trying to mobilise finance, not nature finance, finance. So working with the 49 farmers up in that catchment through West Cumbria Rivers Trust, this is a piece of work that's been ongoing for about 6-7 years, we've done the modelling to work out how we can reduce flooding into Keswick by 10 to 15% in a 130-year flood. And also include clean the water for Thermere. Thermere is a reservoir that provides drinking water to 2.8 million people in Manchester. So what can we do within the catchment, working with farmers, to change the way we're managing our land to deliver cold, clean water, but primarily through flood risk management, water quality, but also habitat restoration. The Derwent water at the bottom of Thermere here is actually one of the highest salmon fisheries in the Derwent catchment. So bringing these concepts together, public funding, NFM, water quality, to drive that catchment scale change is what we're looking to do. Now, it's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. And to my mind, this is a mechanism that we should be able to scale over time to really bring in finance to deliver improvements for our rivers. And with that, I think I'm going to hand over to Charlotte at BELU, who's one of the companies we've been working with over the years. Thank you.
Thanks. So I thought for a bit of context, I should probably explain a little bit about who BELU are. We are a pioneering social enterprise. We were founded on the belief that there is a different way to do business, and that in doing business, you can help to solve some of the world's problems. So I guess for that reason, it's why it brings me here today. The purpose-driven element within us is very much fixed within our DNA. So everything that we do is founded in the belief that we can do something that is environmentally better than what's in the market, but we can also deliver social impact. So we do that in two ways. So one is we invest in nature-based solutions, and we are working with the Rivers Trust. And the other is that we invest all of our remaining operating profit with the charity WaterAid to bring clean water and sanitation to millions of people around the world who don't have it. So in terms of our journey to get here, I guess what I should start with saying is that we used to be a carbon neutral business. So we are committed and continue to commit to reducing the carbon impact of our business. But the difference now is that instead of offsetting the remaining carbon emissions, we actually invest that money instead in nature-based and biodiversity projects. We made that conscious decision because we became disillusioned with the marketplace and felt that actually we needed to have something that was closer to home, so we had some local impact, and some impact that we could engage our stakeholders with, our supply chain with, our team with, and our clients. And that just wasn't possible in the way in which the carbon offset market operates. So I thought I'd just give you a very, very kind of top-line view of what the projects are that we've been working with from the Rivers Trust. So first of all, we have adopted Alex's water stewardship model. So we're probably, I think, moving towards, but he may disagree, the collective action rung on the ladder. We have our own replenishment portal. We've shared that, and we've looked at the risks within our supply chain. So we shared that with our supply chain manufacturing partners. And in part, what we're trying to do is demonstrate that actually they can take responsibility as well of their own water footprint. So we're trying to inspire others to think differently and do things differently in the way that we do too. We've also worked with Rivers Trust on the big River Watch. So this was a campaign that was about engaging people. So getting people to have a look at what they can see around them when it comes to their local rivers and feeding back. And we had 6 million people participate in that. So small actions, but ways in which we can engage with our clients, but also we can get more people thinking about water and the importance of water, which I think in this country is sometimes taken for granted. The final thing that we've done is a piece of restoration work. So these are images from the Ravensbourne River and Glassmill Pond. This was done in conjunction with a number of different supporters, so Keep Britain Tidy, the Port of London Authority, the Environment Agency, Thames Water, British Waterways, and I'm sure many more. The importance here for us was really to see the impact and understand and educate our team, our stakeholders, as I've already said, about the importance. And actually, our purpose is to change the way the world sees water. And this brings it to life in a way that I think it's hard to do just in kind of words and pictures. So I think hopefully the before and after certainly was a great opportunity for our team to get engaged and for us to really start skilling ourselves in understanding the importance of, as Alex was explaining, the catchment management. So this is obviously in London, so it was a great opportunity for us to take the team down there to understand the importance of separating the river and the pond, but also the community and engaging the community and enabling them to have somewhere beautiful to come and spend the afternoon. So hopefully a little bit of a kind of headline in terms of how we as a business are bringing to life water and actually how we're getting involved in some of the amazing work that Rivers Trust are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to take Alex's advice and we'll drop the nature for this discussion and talk about financing instead. Can I ask you first, Allison, the difference between finance and funding. So when we talk about nature finance and funding, just talk a little bit about the difference, or are they all one and the same?
I mean, I think they go together in trying to reach our collective goals. And I think a lot of the people that I was talking about where we're trying to engage more on the individual philanthropy side of things, they're also decision makers within businesses. So I do think that they kind of come together and bridge that gap. But they are two really important pieces of the pie and what we need to do. I think that the financing side of things, for us anyways, is probably still in its infancy. There's very few companies where we are that are really looking at that at a deep level. But
can you give some examples, sorry to interrupt you, Can you give some examples of what is now emerging, this very early stage of nature credits and what potentially could be that model?
Yeah, we have two examples from some of our corporate donors. One is a forestry company, and they reserved a large swath of old growth forests, and they're actually selling that on the carbon market. But as a part of their giving back strategy, we are one of their benefiting charities. So they're looking at that kind of long-term model. Another one is a mining company. They set up a big nature positive fund outside of their corporation, and the goal there is to leave nature in a better situation, not just kind of making up for the degradation that they're doing as an organization. So they've given us a small amount of money to scope out some really large scale projects. So that's kind of what I mean. These are in their infancy. Those are pretty new developments for us.
Peter, do you want to come in there a little bit about the financing v funding?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, I think it would probably classify as funding. So as an organisation led by the principal owner, Iceland and Africa as well, by the way, have captured the imagination in terms of the plight of nature in those two areas, one in the form of the Atlantic salmon and another, which is a completely different topic and a very large topic for us, where we spend a lot of time, is in southern Tanzania, for example, and we've worked in Zambia as well, working with the government there as well on conservation. And so we're really, and Jim himself is funding that. And so we're not there at the moment involved, but that's evolving. I won't say too much, but I can see a time when some of these projects would develop into what I call financing, which is obviously enlisting, I mean, we're not a bank, yes, in Austria. So it's enlisting other funders to come in, but with more of the motivations that you just described, I think. So that may or may not happen. We'll see how that evolves, and I can't really speak to that. But the work so far has been principally around funding.
You gave some helpful advice at the end of your talk, Peter. Can you give a little bit of an insight? I can only presume that you get applications quite a lot for money and people asking for different organizations asking for money. Can you give a bit of an insight into how you make your decisions about who to fund?
I'll try to give a little bit of insight into how we make our
all
decisions.
The secrets.
But they're not necessarily my decisions, so take that as the caveat. But generally speaking, it has to be something which we feel both passionate about and we think we can contribute to. Yeah, so we have some thoughts on how to contribute. So we're a pretty, as I said, we're a pretty pragmatic group of people, and unless we think we can add something rather than just money, then we're unlikely to go very, very far. And we do this not just in nature, but we also do it with children, and especially underprivileged children, actually, where we've got a Forgotten 40 charity which funds some of the poorest schools. Actually, helps head teachers in poorest schools and so on. And it's the same motivation. It's not just we see an issue that we're passionate about, but it's also something we think we can make a contribution to through one mechanism or another. And I think that combination is really quite important in issues like these.
How important, finally, is data? So, I mean, as a company, I presume you want to see and be able to talk about this funding in a way, look, we invested here, then this happened. So when people come to you, are you also looking for the data up front?
Well, we're looking for the case, in which it usually involves some data, yes. I mean, clearly, people don't come to us people do come to us, but we're more inspired to act upon the things we have a passion for in the organisation. Let's put it that way. And as you might imagine, with a very large company, then a very large number of notes come into the company asking for this, that, and the other. And like any other company, we can't possibly, we don't have the bandwidth to even, service hardly any of those, to be quite honest. But there are a few things that we do, as I say, and we feel passionate about, and we think are big issues, and we think by participating in it, we can bring something to it. I've mentioned too, we also do antimicrobial research in Oxford and elsewhere, where we put a substantial amount into solving the problem of involved in antimicrobial resistance. So it's those sorts of things that will attract our funding, and let's see how they develop over time, and it becomes they become substantial. They may well evolve into financing as well as funding.
Charlotte, do you want to come in there a little bit about the kind of criteria you use deciding to fund or not?
Yeah, sure. I think primarily we are driven by the passion and by the purpose. So it needs to align to our purpose. It needs to be a values-aligned organisation. We need to be convinced that actually what we're going to do will make a difference and that there are no unintended consequences. And that was one of our challenges when we were looking at the carbon offset projects that we could invest in, because we were having to buy through a broker. We had no idea really what was happening, whether that money even ended up at the place that we expected it to end up. So we wanted to have no ambiguity and real clarity and transparency throughout the kind of the transaction. so that we could feel that that money was invested in a way that actually made a difference. So for us, it's very much the values alignment piece and making sure that it's a long-term partnership. For us, it's not about doing something one year and then changing to another organisation the next year. It's about building up our understanding and our awareness over the long term, because it's only then that you can really have meaningful impact.
Alex, I mean, there's a lot of issues to unpick here, greenwashing being one, and we can get to that in a minute. But with regard then to what Charlotte said, you have upfront funding for a project, we'll say, and then the really hard bit is the ongoing funding, isn't it? What do you ask of the corporates that you deal with?
So, as I say, this has been a very nascent market and things have moved quite quickly. We've learned an awful lot in the last 3 or 4 years, I have to say. One of which is the monitoring and maintenance of these projects. So, you know, you're building a wetland to offset your water use. Well, that's fine, but a wetland's got a shelf life. It's like any other asset. It works for, you know, if you're lucky, 10 years, after which point you need to do some serious maintenance. So probably after 5 years. So actually, as we've gone through, as we've kind of learnt through the projects and built up the portfolio, and as the methodologies kind of improved, we now have, with each of our projects, we have a sort of monitoring and maintenance budget. So it's, yes, that's the capital cost to build your wetland or do whatever else, but to make sure that that's still delivering a return in terms of your replenished volumes for 10 years, we need to put in a maintenance and monitoring budget. So we're doing quite a lot of interesting work with citizen science. How can we do that from a minimum of our product? So, you know, the first ones we didn't really think about it, but now that's part and parcel of the kind of any project proposals we put together.
How do you maintain your own values? And I'm asking this in a very practical way. Do you actually have a contract with these companies that you work with? And how do you make sure that your beliefs, values, what you're about, don't shift?
Yeah, good question. So yes, we have partnership contracts. Nature of the contract often changes subject to, you know, the nature of that particular partnership. How do we keep true to our values? Well, a couple of red lines, I suppose. Any of the projects that we do are defined by the needs of the catchment partnership. So actually, we're only doing projects that are already identified by community groups as part of their catchment partnership plans. And there's more work we need to do in that space, but actually, that's how, to my mind, how we start to get to that scale and credibility and authenticity. The second point is, we only do projects that are needed. So people might need X volume of water, but we don't do those projects. We'll just do the projects where they are needed in the catchment. So rather than doing one big wetland, we might need to do 2 or 3 smaller wetlands because they'll have the biggest impact. So that, to my mind, is how we kind of keep true to our cause. It's about what delivers the biggest benefits for our rivers.
Allison, do you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of maintaining your values and making sure that you stay firm in terms of what you believe in, what your values are, what you want to do, and then dealing with a range of corporates?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for us, our philosophy has really been that corporations should really be at the front of the line in terms of giving and giving back. You know, when I was in healthcare, it was really similar. People would take aim at us for accepting money from pharmaceutical companies, but they should be, again, at the front of the pack, giving back. But, you know, before we enter into any kind of donor relationship or partnership, we do our homework on these organizations, and I think it's really similar to what Alex described in terms of that values. So the mining company that I mentioned, before we accepted that donation to do the scoping work, I mean, Jason and I probably had half a dozen meetings with them to make sure there weren't strings attached that we were, as an organization, uncomfortable with. And, you know, it became clear that they really wanted to park those funds with a neutral entity that could really identify what's best for salmon without their corporate interests involved. So, you know, I think we have a number of mechanisms internally to try and filter through that.
I mean, greenwashing, Alex, is obviously a worry. It's a worry from both sides, and I might come to you on that, Peter, in a minute. But from your point of view, Alex, do you have safeguards?
Well, we work with Coca-Cola, so arguably one of the more toxic brands in the world. And when we get accused of greenwashing, I can point to the amount of wetlands they've built. I can actually say that has happened as a direct result. Now, you could argue, well, in the general, you know, global scheme of things, it is just inconsequential, and, you know, but you've got to start somewhere. I think it was you who said on day one about, you know, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. We need to move, we need to shift the dial. We've talked repeatedly today about time running out. We've got to lean in, we've got to make action happen. It's not ideal. But, you know, 1 wetland's good, 2 wetlands is all right, 50, 300, 1,000, that starts to make a real change. And to be honest, that's the space I'm in.
I suppose the question is more not necessarily do you stop them doing that, but it's more, are you comfortable coming out and calling out the polluters?
Oh,
are you
yes.
still able to use your voice in a way?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in a way, if you're having these partnerships, we end up sat round the table, we're being invited to sit round the table where we wouldn't otherwise be sat. And I think being in the room with a little bit of leverage is better than being outside the room and nobody listening to you.
And Peter, it does work 2 ways. I was interested myself. There's a nature financing project taking off in Trinity College in Dublin. I was at it. And some of the big major corporates there said to me privately, we're actually worried about greenwashing the other way, that we're involving ourselves in something that may not be what it says it is. So it was an interesting perspective that it works both ways in that regard. Is that a concern of yours?
I think it does. I mean, greenwashing is always a concern. You know, we're very conscious of the fact that we might be accused of greenwashing by being involved in some of these projects, but I hope it comes across that it's nothing to do with that, and we keep a moderately low profile outside this community, and you know, and a few pieces of paper on that sort of stuff, and we're not into the carbon credits and so on in a significant way either. For example, our Icelandic project, we're planting trees, 1 million a year. You can imagine there might be some carbon credits coming from that, but that is definitely not the driver. And in any case, the biggest danger at the moment is treading on a tree. And, you know, they take quite a time to grow in Iceland. So that's certainly not the driver. And we try our best to avoid it. I can't say there's any one strategy for avoiding that. But what I can say is in the broader business, where this is very clearly an issue, greenwashing, when we take actions for our transition plans, and we've set our targets for greenhouse gas, et cetera, we have targets in other environmental parameters and so on, I hope we do it in a way that, that sort of combines with action extremely clearly. And so far, I think that's been accepted. So we're not just saying, you know, yes, we're doing a bit of this just to present a good image. We're actually doing it, and by the way, it costs money. And by the way, we think it's an opportunity as well. And that's the important thing on all these activities, I think, to do with transition. There is obviously the threat, and we all know the threat. We know the threat to society and so on. But there are also very significant opportunities, and it's managing a transition in such a way that you can capture those opportunities whilst remaining in business, frankly. Economics are important for sustainability, otherwise it's not sustainable. And so, as we do that, we hope we focus on things that are meaningful, have clear actions and so on, and not just wishy-washy stuff.
One thing that struck me watching your talk, Peter, was, I mean, I'd love to know, are you quite unusual in the corporate world as being someone who's actually very heavily involved? I mean, in another way of interpreting your talk was you were talking like a scientist, and that someone who has come from the corporate world, not only funded something through the company, but also got heavily involved in it, prepared to come to conferences like this.
Yes, that's the dangerous bit, really. That's the risk bit coming to conferences. No, it's because I'm passionate about the topic, to be quite honest, and and one has to retain a balance. But I'm passionate about the topic. Ask Rasmus, he'll tell you. We're passionate about the topic, and that's the characteristic of our funding in this area. It's because we're passionate about the topics, and we think we can make a contribution. Nothing more, nothing less.
Alex, do you see more of that? That it's not just the companies are prepared to fund and step back and wait for the report saying impacts or not, but they actually really want to get involved, and there are people like Peter who are saying, I want to get actually actively involved in that.
Everybody we work with at a corporate level, I ultimately want to become revolutionaries. I want, from the CEO down to the people on the shop floor, through these projects to start to understand the value of water, their local rivers, get them involved, get them engaged, get them inspired, because these projects will come and go, but actually it's getting those people really bought in and understanding the interconnectivity of what we kind of live. We're fortunate enough to live and breathe and understand this stuff, but for most people they don't get. But any opportunities to get them inspired, to educate them so that they can go home and educate their kids and whatever else, that for me, that's the really sweet spot. That's where we get the change that we need, the generational change that we've talked about previously.
Charlotte, how do you decide which projects to fund within a partnership that you've already created? So is it very much based on the science? Is it based on something else? How do you choose where to put your money?
Generally, it's a collaboration because it's a partnership. So we'll say, you know, what's going on? What do we need to, you know, what should we be involved in? And I think that's why, you know, it is, you know, as Alex said, it's quite nascent. So we've been on a bit of a journey ourselves. So we've been, you know, doing different things to understand actually what makes the biggest difference, what gives us the reason to talk about these things. So we want to talk about them so that actually we raise the profile so that we can encourage maybe bigger businesses that we work with to think about how they could operate differently and how they could incorporate water within their sustainability plans. So for us, it's doing lots of different things to figure out actually where is that sweet spot. I think bringing it to life in a restoration project is a really easy one to land on, but actually the longevity of the portal and actually using that data, because sometimes people want data, they don't want just the pictures, and so that's where the portal really comes in to bring it to life in a way that, you know, people who want to believe there's a return on their investment can kind of get behind it and understand it and rationalise it against their P&L and everything else. So that's why we're doing different things to figure that out.
Alex?
Yeah, and it's for me, it's an area where we've got, as for the kind of the Rivers Trust and the Catchment Approach and all their partners, there's a bit of a gap at the moment. So, you know, fortunate enough to get approached by companies saying we're looking for a project, and then we scrabble around trying to find a project that's mature enough, where, you know, it's shovel ready enough, it meets all these other constraints. So, you know, what we're trying to do over the next few years, resources and all those things, how do we start to develop a coherent pipeline of projects? So those projects aligned to the local needs of the catchments, aligned to the kind of the cluster farmer groups. There's a whole ecosystem out there of everyone trying to do really good things, but we haven't quite got that level of integration right. So we can align the buyers with the sellers, for want of a better term, align those really credible projects that they can come in and actually be, you know, yes, we've got one in the catchment area where you're operating or your supply chain is. That, for me, is probably going to be a big area of focus over the next 2 to 3 years.
So in some ways, I'm sorry if I'm not interpreting you correctly, is your problem that you've got too many offers and you need to get more projects to fund?
At the moment it is, yeah, based on this morning's emails, yeah.
Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar, Alison?
I don't know if I'd go as far as saying too many offers, but we definitely suffer from the same issue of corporations coming and wanting to invest, and they do want those shovel-ready projects, like exactly how you've described. So the campaign that I mentioned, a big part of that is around regional strategic planning, so we can be ready to then go and make those asks, and hopefully we can do that over the next 2 years and engage more of those organizations with that clear path of the action side of things.
Alex, it is obviously important in terms of the urgency and the scale that corporates come in and fund, and these things can happen quickly and all the rest. Is there a danger, though, that in doing that, governments just sit back and go, we're not doing that nature thing? Corporates can do it, they're more than willing to do it, our budgets are going to go down because these NGOs have got phone calls all the time offering millions and millions. But the problem about all of that is, first of all, you don't have engagement politically, but also the public good might be slightly lost. Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about, you know, the gap in nature funding in the UK of however many billions. There's been lots of talk about payment for ecosystem services, the carbon market, etc., etc. And the first time I heard it was about a month ago, actually, somebody, DEFRA policy, and I don't know if they're in the room, so actually said, yeah, we're probably only looking at about 20% private finance. So if you look at BNG, nutrient neutrality, etc., those kind of sources of income, they pale into insignificance with the level of public funding that's going on. So what we really need to do is aggregate that public funding, use it efficiently, target it appropriately, and then use the private sector funding to kind of leverage in, add further on top. But to think the private sector will fill this space is, to my opinion, completely naive.
Do we have some questions? Yes. Is there a microphone? There is. And then there's another question at the back, Rebecca, afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter, thank you, and the other speakers for your great presentations. My question is on catch and release, not on finance, I'm afraid. I was very struck by the difference between what happens in the UK and Iceland on one hand and what happens in Norway on the other. Yesterday we had a fantastic presentation from the Norwegian Environment Minister. The only bit that I didn't really agree with him on was that the Norwegian government advocate against catch and release. And I wondered whether the Six Rivers project in Iceland might be a good way of trying to encourage the Norwegians to adopt a higher catch and release program.
I mean, we would if we could influence, I think. I mean, we strongly believe in catch and release. I'm very aware of the fact that some people would say that makes little difference in the long term as well. But our strong view is that once you've killed a salmon, caught it and killed it, it's unlikely to spawn. And therefore, if you want a healthy juvenile population at the current circumstances, catch and release is a sensible thing to do. But this is also speaks to monitoring over a long period of time. That's why none of these things can be short term. You have to be there for the long haul, really, because in Iceland it's a 7-year generation, the Atlantic salmon, and you have to see through generations to look at the impact of what you're doing, and that's why you have to be quite prudent at the outset as well. But catch and release for us was going on before we came into Six Rivers. It was already started. MFRI and Goodney were already, I think, advocating probably that then. That's why it started occurring. But overall in Iceland, it's not 100% catch and release in Iceland. If you look at the ICES figures, you get a very good guide to where that's being practiced most and least.
Thank you, Peter. Question at the back.
Oh, thank you. Really nice presentation, really interesting. So Liz Jetchy from Thames 21. My question's for Allison. So which digital campaign resonated the best with your audience of donors, and what advice would you have for charities that don't have that big spend to resonate with the donors? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mean, I would say that the digital campaigns have been a great way to reach a broad audience with a relatively low investment. We started out with the brand piece and doing a little bit of advertising, but you can do that in kind of the low thousands of dollars to reach folks. And then we really have been experimenting with the incentive side of things, and those have worked really well for us. So some of the ones that I showed on the screen, they were really designed around this concept of give and get, so that you kind of have this nice little incentive. And then once they're in that funnel, we know that we can retarget them and ask them again, throughout the year. And that piece has been working really well, so that we kind of get them in with this little incentivized campaign, and then we can kind of build that relationship and that giving relationship with them. So I don't know if I can point to one in particular, but certainly, I don't know if you have Giving Tuesday here. We have Giving Tuesday that follows the Black Friday shopping bonanza in the US, and that campaign is really blown up in Canada as well. So we tap into that and have run these give and gets, and they've done very well for us.
Peter.
Yeah, we're less generous here, I think, than a Giving Tuesday. But it's a question, actually, for my colleagues up here. I mean, we're a private company, so we fund, and we don't have shareholders to worry about. Just 3 people own the company. But obviously, a lot of public companies who are funding conservation work, who are looking to fund this sort of work, have got a group of shareholders that they have to respond to. And I just wondered how people see, when they're looking at nature financing and so on, the impact of the shareholder community behind the public company on how that evolves. And are there any concerns or disadvantages of that associated with that?
Do you want to go first?
Alex is looking at Charlotte.
So we have a very unique structure in that our shareholders are philanthropic investors. So it makes it an easy conversation.
Yes.
So we're probably not typical in that respect. So I can't probably add more to that question, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
All I can say is one of the companies we're working with, they have referenced the fact that the shareholders are very interested in the work that's been going on. So I don't know how influential that's been in terms of the work or the scale of the work or the ongoing nature of the partnership, but they have actually referenced that it's something they've had reported back to their shareholders. It's part and parcel of their ESG reporting. So yeah. I think it's material. I suspect it rather depends on the company. Ultimately, that kind of shareholder influence. I I don't often think, it's probably not as great as some of us would hope.
I mean, we have a very strong shareholder influence, but there are only 3 of them.
Yeah, yeah, well, yeah.
I suppose, Alex, what would happen if you said to the shareholders, we'd like, instead of you planting trees, we want you to look at your pension funds and where you invest?
Yeah, well, there's a great organisation in the States, Ceres, I'm sure, who are very much in that space, who are working with the kind of the investment community to really kind of influence where those funds are flowing to. But I have to say that's rather beyond my pay grade, so I just like building wetlands.
Any other questions? Yes, in the middle here. Thank you, Rebecca.
Just for the whole panel, do you have any thoughts on how we can get businesses and corporations to fund that really important part of the planning and the development phase that gets us to the shovel-ready phase? Because we can relatively easy get funding to put the trees in the ground, but it's the 18 months of preparation work to get us there that really needs the funding.
Alex.
It's really difficult. I'm sorry to say it, it's really, really difficult. It is arguably certainly the biggest constraint on us at the moment. It's the headspace to say everyone to work out the pipeline of projects. You know, those shovel-ready project ideas, they take a long time filling in the application forms. It takes a huge amount of time and effort, and I don't yet haven't worked out how we fund that. That tends to be through philanthropy, or we tend to stick a bit of an overhead on top of our projects to fund the next one, but it's really difficult.
Yeah, that's actually a big part of the campaign that I mentioned is the strategic part and the planning part for us and the coordination piece that Mike touched on. So we're in the really early stages of figuring out how we're having those conversations with donors, but definitely more with the individual side of philanthropy. And we have a lot of big family foundations, so the ones who are quite invested in what we're doing. And it's kind of been a part of that journey, bringing them along for the ride to show that you have to have that coordination piece and that planning piece if you want to get to those shovel-ready and high priority projects. But I wouldn't say we have it figured out. We're sort of midway in that process.
Charlotte, do you have anything to say about that? I mean, I suppose it's absolutely understandable that the corporates want something that they can show. That's what the business is, so they can show that they're investing in this, they're funding this, and this is the result. And I suppose recently trees has been the thing across the board. How would you be convinced to fund the more boring stuff, which is the kind of drudge of having to get through the project, the pre-project planning and all the rest?
So I guess it's always the challenge with unrestricted funding. I think for us, the only way I think is really for it to be packaged up into the overall piece that you are buying into ultimately. So you have to have a layer of overhead, you have to have some planning within that, and that becomes part of the project, and they see, the end goal, but actually within that, the rest of it's included. Because I think if you separate it, it's not engaging enough. And I think that's the risk is that people don't get it at that point. It's a concept, it's not real, and so it needs to be part and parcel. I think you commercially just have to accept that unless you've got philanthropy funds that are unrestricted, then it needs to be part and parcel of your commercial proposition.
Okay, well, we are going to have to wrap it up because it's time now to pass over to Johnny Muir for a film. But first, please thank the panel. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte.
Hello, everyone. Some of you I introduced myself to yesterday. My name is Jonathon from the Atlantic Salmon Trust. I'd like to talk about one of the existing corporate partners that we have at the Atlantic Salmon Trust and indeed the Missing Salmon Alliance, building off what we've just heard and show a really great example of the support that we're getting. Everyone here may have noticed there's some YETI gear knocking around the place. They've given us some fantastic cups with that cold, clean water message on, and we have a beautiful display of the coolers out there that was worked on by a local artist. And really, I just want to give a huge thank you to YETI for not only giving us those bits and pieces, but actually playing a really significant role in sponsoring this very event that gathers us all here. So thank you to the YETI team in the US, Jake Dries and Taylor Johns in particular, but also Lauren Harley, who looks after the brand in the UK and has played an absolutely incredible role over the last couple of years in supporting what we're doing. They've given us a lot of support at the Atlantic Salmon Trust, project funding, unrestricted funding, which we've just heard about the importance of, sponsorship of events, film festivals, gear. They're getting some of their incredible equipment to our teams on the ground who are working in really remote river catchments around the UK. And also, really importantly, they're playing a really good role in helping us communicate the message. So I'm really happy today to be able to show you a sneak peek of a film that we've been working on with YETI over the last few months. Features some of the amazing people who you've already had a glimpse of at this conference. There's a team working on Project Devon. Some of them are in the audience here. It also features Richard Davies and his yellow submarine, which you saw this morning, and some folk from the Tyne, and also ambassador of ours and YETI, the well-known angler Marina Gibson. So please enjoy this snippet of a longer film, which is due to be released on YETI's channels in April. And really, it's just a final opportunity to thank YETI. Their philosophy is all about keeping the wild, wild. And this film will be called, when it's out, Wild Atlantic Salmon. So thank you, enjoy.
That's quite a sentence to finish on. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to invite Mark Saunders from International Year of the Salmon for a few words. Mark.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to quickly thank everybody that's involved in organizing, Wendy, Mark, for having me over. I'm from the east coast of Vancouver Island. I worked for about 6.5 years from 2018 to 2022 on the International Year of the Salmon. And that was all about collaboration. It's a little bit funny that I'm the only person speaking in this section on collaboration, but in fact, almost all of you that spoke were speaking to collaboration. And I dare say that just about all the successes that we saw and all of the hope that was given and came out of this place was involving collaboration. It's about the salmon, but it's really, the hope is about the people and see what we can do about it. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about collaboration. That's last night going back to the hotel, and it was a little bit of beautiful night and a little bit of bittersweet for me as I was walking across. As I worked on the International Year of the Salmon, I came over to the Atlantic about 6 or 7 years ago to go into the rooms of NASCO and other organizations, and I knew nobody. Most people were mildly amused that I was there. You know, there's some guy came all the way from Vancouver. What's going on? And some people, I'm looking at Andrew back there and Ken Whalen, took me by the hand and said, there's a lot of things you could step in here, and we need to walk you around and help you learn and become part of it. Many years later, I'm back here, and I'm among friends. I walk into this room, I met people come across the room to talk to me, we understand each other, and we've collaborated and worked together on some amazing projects under this International Year of the Salmon. And seeing the rest of the Pacific group, well, we're here now talking, and speakers from the Atlantic saying, yes, I see what, this has been fantastic, I've learned about what's going on around the world. And before it would have been, it was great to get together and see what was going on in the UK or maybe in the Atlantic. And now we took the echo chamber, and the echo chamber, what I've been working on, and the International Year of the Salmon, was about building the echo chamber up. And what I'm hearing here is we have an opportunity to take the echo chamber, go from the echo chamber and go out to, I thought that Alistair's point this morning, he doesn't want to talk to 100 people, he likes talking to this, but he wants to reach millions of people. And I'm also struck, the bitterness of the walk back last night going across was just how tragic the spot that we've come to. I had never believed in my life that I'd be here having a conversation really about the extinction of salmon. It's just almost too hard to believe. So there's a bittersweet part about it. We've got some incredible opportunity and people here. So I want to just talk a little bit about collaboration that we did in that International Year of the Salmon, but I want to focus on, this is more about where do we go from here with it, as opposed to, you know, what interesting things we did in the past. And I'm going to say, as I was walking back there last night, somebody said, when was your last charitable donation? Well, it was last night, and I walked off the bridge, and cognizant I'm in London, there was some, an older homeless man, you know, bundled up in a sleeping bag with his request out for some funding. And I walked by him, and I realized I've been reflecting on how friggin' lucky I was and privileged to be in London and have to have done the traveling and met the people I've done. So I turned around and I made a donation. And he engaged me, which is not a great thing that you normally do in a downtown city anywhere, but we talked for 10 minutes because he found out I was working on salmon, and he said, I've been around salmon all my life. And he asked me, a guy that's got so much to worry about, just meeting his daily needs, and he said, what's going on with those salmon? Is it the temperature? And I went, you know, okay. So we had a 10-minute conversation, and that just comes back to, that's why we're here. And so where do we, going the wrong way. So where do we go with collaboration? I'm just going to jump to the end of my pitch here. So right from day one, when I was in with the NGO meeting, the theme was, how do we work together when we leave here? And I'm going to suggest, why don't we form a global salmon recovery coalition? Right across, I initially thought, you know, hemispheric or something like that. No, we've been talking global right now. So how do we build a collaborative governance structure to let us do that? And what if at the end of, you know, very soon, we were able to, you know, a headline or a byline that was saying the urgent work of hundreds of dedicated salmon organizations across the globe has successfully begun to bring the wild salmon back from the brink of extinction. And that's the urgency. And so how do we my Year of the Salmon stuff tried to set the tone, to build this room up. But how do we energize this room to be the spark that takes it and pushes it where it needs to go? So I just want to acknowledge that that's the two faces of collaboration what I was getting to earlier, as Mark Bilsby and Ken when we were in Seattle. The International Year of the Salmon, two organizations, the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission from Vancouver in the Pacific, NASCO in the Atlantic, agreeing to work together for 5 years to try to see if we can make a difference. So I'm not going to belabor this. The problem, we know it. It's right across our respective ranges. We're challenged we've got, as we've all talked about, these so many different stressors that we're trying to deal with over this spectacular life history. But the fact is, we've got a pretty simple management system that's basically been built around circa 1980 that says, well, if we put enough fish back on the spawning grounds and manage our fisheries accordingly, we should be and we have some regulatory habitat measures that really aren't linked to the how we're managing the fish, but we think if we do those, everything will be all right. Well, maybe it hasn't been all right, so we're going to tweak it a little bit. Perhaps we'll have some stocking, we're going to do some restoration, we're going to keep tweaking. But we've been watching this decline for 35 years, since the early 90s, in both basins. Make no mistake, even though our scientists haven't been talking about it, it's been going on in both basins, and yet we're still going down and doing it the way we've always done it and hoping for a different outcome, and I don't think it's coming. So what do we need? We've heard it here on quite a number of talks. We need to think about managing and working on these salmon right across their life history. So we've got this life history, it's crazy complicated, thousands of kilometers, dozens of regulators, and 1,000, they've died, we're losing them by death by 1,000 cuts. But what if we could turn it around and manage, you know, to bring them back by 1,000 good decisions that are going to bring these animals back to us? So how would we go about that? This is, what we're seeing with salmon is what they call a wicked problem. People will say, well, let's do this. Can we go ahead with this room and do this thing? Well, they're going to say right away, oh, that's way too complicated. You couldn't manage across that whole life history. Oh, it's going to cost way too much. No, you couldn't afford to do that. Oh, it's way too controversial. Like, how are we going to get all these land use decisions? People need to have jobs. People need to eat. People need to do their business. And so it becomes a wicked problem that doesn't get solved. But any time a wicked problem has been solved, it's through collaboration. And collaboration is about bringing the people that are affected by the decision into the room. And so that's what I've heard as we're going forward today. So watershed governance and governance at a number of different layers, if we can use technology and some smart nested scales of governance that go across the salmon's life history, we can make, I think, we can do this thing. So this is I'm going to acknowledge Pacific Salmon Foundation, the First Nation Fishery Council. There are others working on this problem right across the hemisphere. We heard about the EU Water Directorate. There are catchments. So if we start at what you're looking at is the life history, and then the circles that are going around, you know, we start at the catchment, and that's an absolutely brilliant, we can support pushing forward catchment. I come out of a watershed that's got a world-class example of how to do that. When you're starting to go across all of the fresh water, big catchments needs probably broken down by some finer scales. But then countries that have everything, including the coastal and the fresh water, that's where everything has to come down from that level in terms of probably in that level in funding, although at places like catchment, there's lots of opportunity for partnership. But the big ring going around is the international. And you could say international, well, NASCO has to look after, you got all the nations to look after the Atlantic salmon. But this room allows us, especially when we're sharing practices, trying to understand what we need to do, working fast and hard and on big solutions, and you want to pick up a phone and phone a friend, you've got the Pacific, you've got the Atlantic, it's a global ability to try and solve this problem. So the Year of the Salmon, these are some of the organizations. The blue are the intergovernmental organizations and where they have responsibility, like NASCO, NPFC, this was our slide, so we were right in the middle. So these are the places, and all the countries around it are working on it. Most of these and these are the science organizations, ICES and Pisces, and the little arrows there's MOUs between all of these, a little like putting on a promissory ring, like, we'll phone you, yeah, great, thanks, we'll like to work together. But this needs to be way more deliberate. We need to set up the organizational structure so we're actually committed to a deeper level of collaboration and build into that partnership. And this was the IYS set of partners. We've seen a lot of slides like this, but we leveraged, I think it was just about $1 million in kind of core funding to keep the lights on, and that went up, we leveraged that up to 13 million or something. So what kind of a structure, if we build this coalition, what would it look like? Instead of putting one of those goofy org charts, I'd rather just show people. With NASCO and NPFC, we had a coordinating committee that was across the hemisphere. And in each of the basins, we had steering committees. So it was very much focused here. This group did not directly run this. And this was a small secretariat that for about $300,000 Canadian, which isn't very much for the rest of you, we were able to operate on that and have some tremendous work come out of it. So for this group, if we go into this coalition, I would say it would be more top-down, that we would take a core set of partners here, drawing from the groups that are in the room. We would probably set up in different basins as needed partnership organizations to follow under that. And then I think for about 600,000, say, British pounds per year, we could run a secretariat that I'm seeing as a couple of coordinators, a director, 2 data scientists, and some communications, et cetera, that could drive this thing forward. And I'll explain why I put data scientists into there. Because I'm talking about this as being an accelerator. This isn't just a gather and have some more fun about things. Let's figure out what the top priorities that we need for salmon in the short term, and then, but I'm talking on a global perspective. What could we'd say to each other, what's the first thing we're gonna do that could make a difference if we started doing it today? And other stuff that's gonna be a little longer. Let's say it's gonna take 5 years to help build out catchment governance, that kind of thing. But the accelerants that I've got on that are data, mobilizing our information about salmon and our ability to connect. Build a network. This is what a graph database gets visualized. If you look at a constellation here of nodes, these nodes are all people, places, ideas, data about salmon. This would be a salmon graph. And we can build this, and it couples with the AI, artificial intelligence, that allows us to accelerate the kind of things that we can do that would have taken days before, years before. We can do this really fast now. I'm not going to speak to that one. So if you're a non-believer or not there for AI yet, I gave this just for fun. I gave this question to ChatGPT. Would there be a good reason for the Atlantic Salmon Trust, Long Live the Kings, the Pacific Salmon Foundation, and the Atlantic Salmon Federation to collaborate? That was you can read it. That's the conclusion that it came to in 30 seconds. And I couldn't have written the overarching, what the outcome of this. But what you don't see here is it also gave me 4 pages of analysis that told me these are each of their visions, how they were similar, how they were different, the activities they undertook. And that was just from it mining the website. So if we had people actually developing the systems to serve us and including our information, imagine what we could do across this ability to collaborate. So what would we do if we put this group together? What were kind of the activities that we'd be pushing forward? This is a symposium in Tromsø at the opening of the International Year of the Salmon. This is the concluding one. We pushed the envelope on not just asking speakers to come up. We asked groups to work for 6 months, for a year, to synthesize ideas on about stocking, ideas about forestry, habitat restoration, and then bring that wealth of knowledge. So underneath this were dozens and dozens of experts that were bringing a very solid opinion of where to go for. Those are 200 people came into that room, half from the Atlantic and half from the Pacific, and it was outstanding. This was a working group that was formed to look at the pink invasion, and this is a Zoom call we had a group of 30 scientists from the Atlantic and the Pacific that worked out and just got the ICES award for a paper that describes the management implications of the pink salmon as they're expanding their range and throughout it. I'm not going to go through these. That was the list of the 68 scientists from the Atlantic and the Pacific, the priorities for what they want to work on together. Besides the pink salmon, that was the first priority. We could work together on pushing watershed governance across the globe and at the catchment level. This is the catchment I live in. That's the premier of the province with our First Nations and others, and incredible roundtable that's done spectacular work on the Cowichan. First Nations, Indigenous peoples, at the very end of the IYS, we brought together a gathering from right across the northern hemisphere of salmon peoples from across the First Nation. I would see this group continuing to build this gathering and this collective of Indigenous peoples from across the basin. The other last idea I've got is take those big ideas that we've got and put together incubator groups to come up with the solutions. This is all solutions-based. So previously on the IYS, Jock did a nice job of explaining that we did some massive cruises in research in the Pacific. Catherine yesterday talked about Becky project that's coming. The Likely Suspects was the first IYS project that came out. Ken Whalen and I, Ken pitched it to NASCO. These are the kind of projects that we could facilitate and make happen. I'm just going to leave you. We need to be courageous. I heard that earlier. We need to be bold. We need to take some steps. The urgency is now. That's a look at the polar view, and that's the jet stream that we all share. All our countries are around that. And as it's surging and failing and doing really bizarre things to us, we're all in that together. And I just make a pitch that we take all this progress that we've got in the room, and let's turn it into something that we're not just going to meet in 2 years and go, wow, we're still another 2 years into this problem. We're going to be at a much different place and pushing to some serious outcomes. So thank you. Thank you, sir. That's yours. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. We've made it. We got to the end. We've got to the end of Wild Salmon Connections, which is just terrific. And I'm just delighted with how the whole thing's gone. It's been completely first class. We have tried to bottle this up into something. And behind the scenes have been a lot of people discussing and negotiating and chatting about a declaration. Kat Gilby, who hasn't been at the fore, is the program manager for the Missing Salmon Alliance, and she has been helped navigate this. We have got a declaration which is coming out of this conference, and we would be really grateful if as many people can sign it over lunch as possible. But if they can't sign it over lunch, if they could take the QR code from it and then sign it online, we would be thrilled. So amazing job to have got a declaration out. We've communicated and tried to bring on board as many people as possible in order that we have a declaration to take things forward. So well done to the team for getting a declaration out. Well done. Okay, I am actually going to get you to raise to your feet. Mark Lloyd stole this morning from me, but I'm going to get you to get to your feet 3 times, okay, because I've got a lot of thank yous to do. The first one is to Andrew Wallace and Andrew Sutcliffe's team and to Fishmongers Hall. I mean, honestly, unbelievably seamless, absolutely incredible. From the moment you walk through the door with the security to being brought up here, everything clean and immaculate, every single event that they had, to the cooks who put the food on, which frankly was completely delicious, and the way in which the coats were handled, the way in which the coffee was served, the way in which everything was put together was just first class. I could not have faulted it. Please rise to your feet and thank Fishmongers Hall. The second group is quite a long list, so bear with me as I run through the list. I want to thank our sponsors. These things don't just happen. They cost a huge amount of money to put on. Fishmongers bore a massive amount of it, and we thank Fishmongers. But New Core Capital, under Hugo Llewellyn, has come in for a big check. YETI and Pitton Trust were fantastic in coming forward and sponsoring us. I want to thank the partners who have come here. I mean, the work that has gone into those presentations, the amount of enthusiasm, the ability to pull together all of the information that was pulled together for this conference has been absolutely outstanding. The level of presentation has been first class, and that's what's positioned this conference at a different level. So I want to thank the Atlantic Salmon Federation, Robert Otto, the Norwegian Salmon Rivers and Torfinn Everson, the Pacific Salmon Foundation and Mike Mina, Long Live the Kings, Jack White, and International Year of the Salmon, Mark Saunders, have done a phenomenal job in pulling things together. The keynote speakers were off the charts every single day. We started off with Thames 21 and the primary school kids. I mean, what a great way to go. Pull those kids in, put them on a terrifying stage, and get them to present. Fawn Sharp, not a single note. She came up here without a note. She delivered absolutely bang on where we needed it in order to get things going. Dieter Helm, I'm going to come back to where Dieter Helm, the message Dieter Helm left us. But to have somebody like Dieter Helm, a heavyweight economist who is advising governments to take the time out to come and see us, brilliant. The cabinet secretaries, three ministers came to this conference. That is just outstanding. Really, really good. Some of their messages we might not have liked, but we got them here. Fantastic. I want to thank all the speakers again. I mean, really, you did a terrific job. Absolutely amazing. The Salmon School and Joseph Rosano and Scott Schuyler, thank you so much, guys, for coming again. It's a huge effort on your behalf to come the whole way over. We really appreciate it. I'm going to say a tiny bit more about that in a minute. The First Nation people who came here under Fawn Sharp, but there were others here whose names I'm not going to go through. But you add so much to this, and it goes the whole way back. It was here in the UK, and those people have been lost. In fact, we found on where I live, on the farm that I live, we found this year 3 5,000-year-old Bronze Age pots. And when I was talking to the archaeologist on Friday last week, I said, why did we find those pots there? They had bodies in them, okay? Not a great thing to find if you're trying to build a dairy because it slows things down a bit. But the reason they were there was because it was fertile agricultural land and salmon came up the river. That's what she said. It was overlooking salmon. So there we are. We're all First Nations in some shape or form, but the First Nations to be here, thank you very much. And then finally in this group, before I get you to stand up, I do want to a big thank you to Pete, Craig and Simon from PSA, who are at the back of the room, who seamlessly put all of this on. So there were almost no mistakes from what I could see. My microphone's working fine. Everything's cool. You can have a nightmare at these conferences when you're bringing in ministers on Zoom and all that stuff. So a massive thank you. I would like you all to be upstanding and thank those people. The final group, and the first one's already been thanked this morning with a standing ovation, but she was extraordinary. Ella McSweeney held everybody to task. I suspect if you sat in those chairs towards the end, you were thinking, what ball am I going to have to navigate now? She's not here. She was amazing. As Mark Lloyd said, all the questions she asked were the questions I wanted her to ask, but she did it with civility, and she was not rude to anyone, and she kept the whole thing at a massively high level, so massive thank you to that. I want to thank the CEOs of the Missing Salmon Alliance. These guys put a huge amount of effort into Wild Salmon Connections to make it work. That's Mark Lloyd, Mark Billsby, Teresa Dillon, Alan Wells, Jamie Cook, and Stuart Singleton-White. I've probably forgotten somebody, but they were first class through the years that we had to put this together, and I want to thank them as well as we go forward. Then there was an organising group who worked their kahunas off. That was Kat Gilby, who's just here, Johnny Muir, who did a lot of the communication, Allison Baker, who helped with all sorts of things in the background. Karen Patterson's not here. She did an incredible amount of work bringing all the lists together, getting everybody put together. Rebecca Duncan has made sure that all the speakers were pulled together and really was phenomenal in making that happen. And then there was the person who actually did the logos and stuff called Miranda Cloy, who was involved. And then the main person, the person who absolutely pushed me like only women can push you. She was just phenomenal. She never, ever rested. She made sure we got here, and she was just been fantastic. And that's Wendy Kenyon. But up on your feet, please, for the final time. Right, now's the frightening bit for me, because I don't want to spend very long on this, but I do want to try and do it if I can, which was to try and take the takeaways. We've done it with the declaration. I want to try and take some takeaways from this conference, and then we're done. So, for me, there were three major highlights, which I just thought it was terrific we got there with, and I've mentioned them a bit already. So the first was we got 3 ministers here. But not only did we get 3 ministers here, we actually managed to get some sense out of them. They supported work we're trying to do. They were critical of major corporations who are out there. One of them, from Norway, said he wanted to reduce the environmental impact of aquaculture. Absolutely first class. He put his head on the block and he said it, which means that aquaculture can go on, but it has to reduce its impact. That has to be across the board. We have to look at a way in which we are engaging with all industries. Government is on our side. Three different governments were here. We might wanted them to be stronger. We might wanted them to say other things, but we got them here as a little group. We are not a side group. We are in the middle of the mainstream, we're in the stem, and we've got to demonstrate that we can make it happen. The second thing was this morning. And I actually think Alistair Fothergill was just phenomenal. And I forgot how good that Wild Isles was. It really told the story beautifully. But there's a piece missing. And the artists, Joseph Rosano's in the room, and Joseph and Alistair Fothergill and others are starting with the communication. But all great movements, the Renaissance ended up with industrialization. We ended up with the peace movement. We ended up with Feed the World. They were artists who led that way. They made it happen. The artists are not in the biodiversity and climate change world. They are not making it happen. The salmon, as Alistair Fothergill showed us today, is like the snow leopard. It's like the orangutan. It is a terrific thing for people to tell stories about. The First Nation people, El Allen up on the Findhorn with the Pictic stone. These stories are fantastic. We've got those stories within our community. They need to be put out, but the artists need to tell it. They need to get to that mass communication. And my second takeaway is we need the mass communication to really demonstrate that biodiversity is important and salmon is in the center of that. My final takeaway, which I think he got it, and I think we've just got to remember right back to the beginning of the conference, was Dieter Helm. So what Dieter Helm wanted us to do, and I genuinely would like river managers to go away and work with this and see what they can come up with. What he wanted us to do was to value our assets. He told us to value our assets. So I want to paint a picture of a balance sheet. And you have to remember, there's billions of dollars coming into natural capital, so we're told. But I really believe there are. And in order for those billions of dollars to come and invest in what we've got to understand our assets. And if we take this conference and we pull it apart a little bit, we can get to a place whereby we build a balance sheet. We heard on the itch-in and the test from Allison and Jim Murray about the itch-in and the test. Guys, it's in receivership if it had a balance sheet. It's right down there. It's needing full-blown restructuring. It's got a massive problem. We heard from Lorraine Hawkins on the D. It's actually got the consultants in at the moment, and they're having a look at the balance sheet. They're looking at the natural capital balance sheet, and they've got to do some work to make it happen. And then we had that amazing presentation from Nathan Wilbur at Labrador, and we were just jealous beyond all belief. That's a properly profitable business. The assets in that business are fantastic. So we got to look at the balance sheet and then try and understand it. So what are the assets that were presented at this conference? What assets were there that we can go with? Well, the first one was from the First Nations. It was community. The community is an asset, and we need to nurture that asset. And Allen on the Findhorn demonstrated that in a beautiful presentation. So she's created value on the Findhorn that Dieter Helm would put a value on with that community. She's made something powerful. That has got a value. If you look at the presentation on the Tyne from Jack Bloom, who talked about pollution, and he gave that little graph on the Tyne, and then up it went. If you think about that as an asset on the balance sheet, he has proven, or they have proven, the Tyne has proven, that they can control pollution, and the net effect is that salmon go up. Now that has a value in natural capital terms. That was a fantastic presentation. And Jack, I implore you to go out there and get your baseline valued and get a baseline of all the assets on the Tyne that you've got. And then Mark Owen from the Angling Trust, he came forward with a really passionate piece about angling. That's an asset on the balance sheet. Those anglers are citizen scientists. Those anglers tell you what's going on. They're terrific. They need nurturing. Give them a value. And then we've got habitat, and that habitat needs a value. We've got loads of things that are assets, but we need to think of those assets. Then we go to the other side of the balance sheet. We go to liabilities, and we've got liabilities, and we've got to manage those liabilities and make them less, because they're the ones that are hammering us. And at the moment, those liabilities are running away from us. We had Sophie Allison talking about bycatch. We've had endless presentations on pollution. We've had hydro and Torfin, sorry, I've got your name wrong, Torfin, but Torfin. And then finally we had Anne Anderson on aquaculture. They're liabilities. Those liabilities come off the balance sheet and they make our river systems less. So if you've got assets at the top and then you've got your liabilities at the bottom and you value those, then value them today. Then what are you going to do about investing, reducing the liabilities and increasing the assets? And if we present that to the people who are looking to invest into this area in a natural capital form, I think we've got something really big to sell. I think there's millions of dollars that could come in on that basis. So as a piece of homework, river managers who are in this room and those people who are putting it out there, I think Dieter Helm got it. And that digital world that he talked about was really important. And then, before I finish, the final piece, if you're going to run with a balance sheet, you better understand the law. So if we're going to bring hundreds of millions or thousands of billions of dollars into this area, we've got to have the law. Tom Appleby gave a fantastic presentation to say that they were thinking about it in 1254. They were protecting this area. Get your balance sheet and get it protected. So make sure you understand what your assets are and then protect it. And there's loads of policies out there that you can use in order to protect your assets and work them out in the way that Blue Marine are working them out. Work out how you're going to operate and then get them protected. And go out there aggressively and protect them. Make sure nobody is taking them apart. Protect them, and that way salmon will take forward. So, it's been said 100 times, but we have the skills, we have the knowledge, we have got the enthusiasm, we've got the persistence. I loved that thing this morning from Anne Williams, who when she said, what counts is not the enormity of the task, but the size of the courage. Go out of this hall with a huge amount of courage, go forward, and let's take it to a different level, and then let's try and meet at some point in the future, and let's hear the stories about how you valued your balance sheet and how you got the investment to come into that balance sheet. And let's move it forward on that basis. Ladies and gentlemen, there's one final thank you I would like to make, and that's to all of you. Massive thank you for coming. Massive thank you for all your enthusiasm, and let's go and have lunch.